Welcome to the Fideres Partners presentation on pharmacy benefit management companies and the new interest in their role in the rising price of prescribed medicines. Accused of pricing policies that are hidden from patients, manufacturers, and health plans alike, PBMs have been the target of the U.S. Congress, the National Community Pharmacists Association, and the press. This video provides some background on pharmaceuticals and highlights the mechanisms that seem to put PBMs in the antitrust spotlight. Before we shed light on the matter, some background. U.S. drugs are not a small market. Just since 2006, when Medicare Part D drug coverage sharply boosted the role of PBMs, spending has grown by $100 billion. The projections are for even more spending and rapid growth. But what are PBMs? Here are the actors behind those spending numbers. On the right side is the supply chain of product flow from manufacturer at the bottom up to the distributor who handles the product and gets it to the retail pharmacy and ultimately the consumer or the patient. On the left are the PBMs and the health plans who retain the PBMs to manage the benefits. They don't touch the drugs unless it is in their mail order division. But it all begins with the patient and the way that PBMs structure drug plan benefits. Here's an illustration of several types of cost sharing for drugs delivered at the retail pharmacy, home delivery, and specialty home delivery. The important part of the benefit structure is the tiers. Tier 1 drugs have the lowest cost sharing, Tier 2 higher cost sharing, and Tier 3 the highest cost sharing. In this example, 45%. The PBMs use the tiers to steer physicians and patients toward using or substituting one drug for another. That drives volume and the ability to negotiate with the manufacturers. For manufacturers, you will sell the most prescriptions if you have a generic with the lowest coinsurance or copayment. You do not want your brand name to be Tier 3. You will do anything for your branded drug to be Tier 2, where the cost sharing to the patient is lower. The tier your drug achieves depends on several factors, which we'll explore in a moment, but there's evidence that the PBMs are demanding what the market will bear. The number of products on PBM exclusion lists has grown. The major manufacturers to keep an eye on are in this slide. Most are predominantly branded drug companies, but several major players are generic, and one is both brand and generic. But off to the side are the PBMs and the health insurers who retain the PBM to handle the benefits, not the drugs themselves. What do PBMs do? Basically, they do four things. They create and manage formularies. Formulary management takes highly specialized and expert knowledge of drugs, use rates, and prices. The formularies determine the tiers in our earlier slide where it all begins, and ultimately the prices paid and the rebates based on drug use. PBMs negotiate those rebates, which the PBM can retain, although both the health plan and the consumer and the patient assume those rebates come back to them in lower premiums and lower out-of-pocket costs. This may be the area most shrouded in mystery and non-transparency. Finally, PBMs develop and negotiate pharmacy networks that can be broad or narrow, and they also manage mail order services. Who are PBMs? The next slide shows us the major PBM players to look out for along with their market share. Express Scripts is the largest, followed by CVS Health and OptumRx. All of this raises the question, is there any antitrust wrongdoing in all of this? Let's return to the actors for a moment and talk briefly about number 1, number 2, and number 3 in this slide. At 1, manufacturers pay rebates retroactively to PBMs based on the PBM's placement of the drug on the favorable portion of the formulary. and the ability to increase the sales of the drugs. Rebates can be anywhere from 5 to 25%. There have been allegations that PBMs accept undisclosed incentives. In other words, they pocket the rebates for their own bottom line rather than lowering the price to the consumer or sharing with the health plan at 2. This is called spread pricing. Manufacturers have also been accused of raising prices ultimately paid by consumers at 3 and getting a pass from the PBM for a higher rebate to the PBM. This is especially burdensome to patients with no insurance or those taking a branded drug in Tier 3. In the next slide, there's a certain hydraulics illustrated in all of this. A complex range of quid pro quo goes on between the PBM and the manufacturers. The PBM profit for each prescription depends upon the negotiated price, the rebate, and the spread price, if any, which is the difference between what the PBM gets paid from the health plan and what it costs the PBM with the pharmacy. And these dollar amounts are further driven by the manufacturer's mix of brand and generic drugs, as well as retrospectively how many of their drugs are sold to set the rebate. Finally, the whole thing can be upended if the manufacturer has a new brand or generic they want to quickly gain market share. Their stance on the negotiated price and the rebate for other drugs in their list of drugs may depend upon their new drug and how it is treated by the PBM. This slide shows roughly equivalent contribution margin per prescription or income per product. In the next slide, in contrast, illustrates a deal in which the incumbent generic is favored by the PBM and contributes more to profits. In this slide, we add the ultimate in antitrust and false claims actions. Questionable kickbacks are not unheard of in the PBM world. Much of this is nicely summarized and measured by recent research from IMS Institute, MIT, and Harvard. They used real drug claims data to measure the recent uptick in the prices of incumbent brand name drugs. They're seen here in dark green. Some of these names have been around for decades and are widely used. Such incumbent brand name price rises bring up the question of why the PBMs tolerate these increases. They're supposed to be looking out for the patient and the health plan premiums, after all. And that is why they are in the spotlight.